Animation is no easy task. Some might even argue it's one of the hardest, time-consuming and gratuitous tasks there is, and yet it's also one of the most rewarding ones. Knowing that at this specific moment there might be someone out there coming up with the next generation's introduction to this wonderful medium, or that the next 47 Disney live-action remakes are already lined up, just fills you up with joy, right? Right! One of the hardest parts of big budget animation is coming up with what the next project is gonna be in the first place, and though especially now that Disney owns practically everything, it might seem like there's new stuff coming out every week, but the films we get to see are far from being everything we could have gotten, but may never will. Sometimes there may even be a film in a beloved franchise that concludes with a perfect trilogy of movies, they decide to bring it back, and it gets cancelled only for someone to decide that money. Therefore, money. And money. But there have been examples in the past where even a company like Disney decides to put a lid on a project and that continuing to put resources into it will do more damage than good. Like Dumbo 2 for example, a film that has been produced amidst all the other straight-to-DVD sequels that were made in the late 90s, early 2000s and was supposed to show Dumbo and his friends going to the city, but never made it past a lousy sneak peek on the anniversary DVD. Or what about Newt? Well, not technically a Disney film, one that I looked forward to ever since it was announced, just based on the poster and the little promo art we got. That one also never made it onto the big screen thanks to Inside Out, which admittedly I'm fine with, but makes me wonder what the final product may have ended up looking like, as both of these would have been original stories that I always anticipate far more than new fairy tale adaptations, which Disney does surprisingly little of recently. I don't really think that this is because there's not enough fairy tales or popular fiction to adapt, but even when we get the occasion of Frozen here and there, it is so detached from the story it was based on that it didn't even have its original name attached to it. However, there is one story that Walt Disney himself initially planned to adapt way back in the 1940s and continues to be in development hell to this day, which just so happens to be the best-selling novel of all time, Don Quixote.
Oh my god. Is that Colonel Sanders?
Yeah, as bizarre as it may sound, the biggest entertainment company in the world has never had their hands on working on one of the most important and commonly known tales ever. I mean, who doesn't know the story of this book-obsessed maniac convinced of being able to turn himself into a knight and travel around the country with his sidekick Sancho Panza? The book may have come out in 1605, but has not only spread like wildfire back then, but continues to be one of the most well-known pieces of literature ever created, and is widely regarded as one of the most important ones out there. Why wouldn't they want to create an adaptation of this? We got so many other great ones out there, both on the live action and animated side of the spectrum. There was even a whole cartoon series by Hanna-Barbera. So what exactly happened here? Well, the first time Disney tried to adapt this story seems to date back to when the last few Silly Symphonies were in development back in 1939. So it was probably supposed to be released as part of them as well, but never completed. Alternatively, it may have ended up as an artistically oriented version, such as Fantasia. The team tasked with working on the short under the lead of Bob Carr therefore came up with different ideas of what the characters should look like at first, which included a more simplistic and a realistic approach, which went a rather historically accurate route. There's also this piece of concept art, which shows Quixote sitting at his desk and in armor that looks closest to a finished product of what is available to the public. There isn't much known about this stage of development on the short, as Cinderella and Fantasia bombing at the box office caused the studio to face severe losses in light of the war, and most of the remaining shorts got canned for the time being. When work was continued on the short in 1946, however, the lead artist Jesse Marsh was keen on finally getting the project off the ground and had prepared a full storyboard and plot already, neither of which was ever released. The only thing we know about it is that it would have ended with him and Sancho, alongside Dulcinea, riding through the clouds to a glittering castle beneath a rainbow, symbolizing his death, and that it was supposed to be accompanied by Strauss's fantastic variations on a theme of knightly character, also known as the Don Quixote Overture. The project was then shelved for another few years until it was picked up again in 1951, where it would have been adapted into an even more simplified style, reminiscent of famous New Yorker cartoonists at the time, but this time as an actual feature film, with plot points taken straight from the original story and most of its iconic moments present. One issue they ran into with this was that there was just too many of those in the original novel, which would have caused them to cut down the film significantly, or scrap entire characters altogether, which wasn't unusual for their fairy tale adaptations, but such a vital part of the Don Quixote story that it wouldn't have ended up a compelling narrative. Another big issue was that they couldn't figure out how to make the character of Don Quixote himself an interesting and relatable one, as the books really describe him as more of a lunatic. Despite this, many of the dozens upon dozens of film adaptations tend to portray him as a misunderstood artist ahead of its time that is trying to make the world a better place. As this seems to not have been the portrayal the animators wanted to go with the project, it was scrapped yet again, and wouldn't get picked up again until almost 50 years later, two of the animators that worked on The Hunchback of Notre Dame were asked to take another stab at it. So they began working on their fairly adult-oriented interpretation of the story, which, due to its non-kid friendly nature, got scrapped almost immediately by the executives. This kinda sucks because the artistic abilities of these two brothers really shouldn't go unnoticed. Apparently, they were responsible for parts of the most breathtaking visuals in both Fantasia 2000 and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and undoubtedly would have been able to make the film at least visually appealing. But I can still understand why Disney didn't want to tarnish their brand too much with an all-too-adult take on this classic piece of literature. Adapting this thing is hard enough as is with all these complicated relationships and different characters. You have to consider whether to include the second book as well, and how to rewrite the main character in a compelling way that is still true to the source material. An adult take is probably the way to go with all these restrictions, but that really doesn't scream like the type of movie Disney would have been able to pull off at the time. Despite this, plans for bringing Don Quixote to the big screen weren't yet done for. When Up was first announced in 2007, some people were actually led to believe that this was Disney Pixar's way of modernizing the story and putting their own spin on it. This may seem like a stretch now, but keep in mind, back then all you had was somewhat similar concept art to paintings of the Don Quixote story and this description of the film's plot. It's a coming of old age story about a 70-something guy who lives in a house that looks like your grandparents' house smelled. He befriends a clueless young wilderness ranger and gets into lots of altercations. Our hero travels the globe, fights beasts and villains, and eats dinner at 3:30 in the afternoon. Up may not have turned out to be the Don Quixote retelling you could have anticipated with this premise, but it still makes me wonder what an animated retelling with Disney and Pixar's new technology would look like. Unfortunately, however, at this point, any plans to produce an animated version of the story seem to have been officially scrapped, as in 2012, Disney supposedly bought a pitch by Jeff Morris and Steve Pink. Produced by Johnny Depp, it was supposed to be a modern take on the classic story, and looking at a few of these two other writing credits and considering the fact that there is no concept art for this film whatsoever, this likely means they were yet again trying to push for the next Pirates of the Caribbean. And you can tell how well that turned out. This seems to be a direction they still want to go with this project, assuming it's the same one. Because in 2016, it was yet again announced by The Hollywood Reporter that Disney would be working on a live-action Don Quixote film with Billy Ray as a head writer. Not Miley Cyrus, yeah, that one. He is best known for his work on The Hunger Games, and according to the announcement, also wanted to turn this project into the next Pirates film. But considering how little we have heard from the 2012 project and this one ever since it was teased at, there's no way of telling if either of them are still happening. Hilariously enough, Disney actually could have had the chance to work on a Don Quixote cartoon way back in 1934. Up Iwerks, which was basically forced out of the company a few years prior, had created one as part of his Comic Color series. Which is funny because he was actually the one responsible for most of the early Disney characters and never really got the credit he deserved, but now was able to pull off something with relative ease that Walt's own company wasn't able to pull off even in the new millennium. Not to say the short is all that great or true to the source material, but hey, it's better than nothing, right? While I'm not the biggest Don Quixote fan by any stretch, it's somewhat fascinating to see how a company as gigantic as Disney fails to release any official Don Quixote adaptation even after 70 years of first being conceived. Never has there ever been this much build-up for one single Disney film, and somehow I doubt it will ever live up to anyone's expectations. Would you like to see a Disney Don Quixote film? What is your favorite adaptation of the story? Let me know in the comments and I'll talk to you later. Bye!